Hello, everyone, and welcome to Diversity Matters, where we explore all things diversity, equity, and inclusion related. I'm your host, Oscar Holmes IV, and I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Uché Blackstock to the guest chair today as we talk about her New York Times bestselling book, Legacy, A Black Physician Reckons with Racism in Medicine. As an ER physician and a professor of academic medicine, Dr. Blackstock saw up close the dangerous systemic barriers that Black patients and physicians face. A graduate of Harvard University Medical School, Dr. Blackstock founded Advancing Health Equity, which is an organization that aims to dismantle racism in healthcare and close the gap in racial health inequities. She's a medical contributor to MSNBC and NBC News and has been recognized by Forbes, Essence, the Black Voices for Black Justice Fund, and the American Medical Student Association, among others. Dr. Blackstock, welcome to Diversity Matters.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited.
We'll be back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Hey friends, listen up. You've got to check out De La O Arts, this new art studio based in Philadelphia that's turning heads everywhere. De La O Arts' upcoming work, The Great Newtons, embodies a dedication to merging social justice, science, and art. Visit delaoarts.com to explore artwork, merchandise, and show dates. That's DELAOARTS.com. Support diversity, support art.
Great. So Uché and I go way back. I think it was like 2000 or 2001. Can't really remember the year, but you, along with your sister Oni, and I met when we were studying Spanish in Antigua, Guatemala.
Yes.
Since that summer, I have thoroughly enjoyed seeing how your career has blossomed and truly admire all the great work that you are doing. And your sister Oni. Give her a shout out too.
Thank you. Shout out to Oni.
So I truly appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to talk with us today. So Uché, let's get started. So first, let me just say, to me, this book is up there with Harriet Washington's book, Medical Apartheid, as it just completely opened my eyes to so much bias that's in our healthcare system. And so let's just start off by talking about your mother, who was also a physician, and how she's played a central role in your life. So can you share with our listeners her journey and experience as a Black woman in medicine and what you learned from her?
You know, when I thought about the title for Legacy, it has a double meaning. It's being a second generation Black woman physician and then the legacy of racism in medicine. I realized that I am unique to be able to say that I'm a second generation Black woman physician. That shows how far we have to go, the work that we still need to do in 2024. My sister, my mother, and me were the first Black mother-daughter graduates from Harvard Medical School. And since that was in 2005, since then, there's only been one other Black mother-daughter graduate from Harvard Medical School. So again, lots of work to be done. But all that to say, my mother was an incredible influence on me. And based in Brooklyn, New York, she grew up about 10, 15 minutes from where I live right now in very different circumstances than I did. She was born to a single mom. She had 5 other siblings. They were raised on public assistance. Every day there was uncertainty in terms of where they were going to be living, whether there was going to be food on the table. She changed schools often. You know, so just a lot of instability growing up. But she was always very intellectually curious. And she was fortunate enough that when she became the first person in her family to go to college. And when she went to college, she had a chemistry professor who really saw the light and potential in her and said, you know what, you should apply to medical school. And she did. She ended up getting into all of her medical schools and then ended up at Harvard Medical School. Of course, there she felt like a fish out of water. You know, she could say, yeah, my mother worked full time, raised 6 children, got off of public assistance, right? But she couldn't say, you know, her mother was a Nobel Prize winner like some of her other classmates. But she found her folks there and she got through, and she could have gone anywhere afterwards, but she came back to New York City. She trained in Harlem Hospital in internal medicine, then did a nephrology fellowship in Brooklyn. And she ended up working in the same neighborhood and community that she grew up in. So those were the lessons that I learned, you know, as a child. Like, you can go off to these, you know, these Ivy League institutions, right? But that have tremendous amount of resources. But you can always come back to work in service to your community.
That's just amazing. And shout out to your mother, such a trailblazer. And as we think about that, you know, as you mentioned, you are unique. a very unique situation in terms of having a mother-daughter who have graduated from the same medical school. And when people hear that, they may, think, oh my God, the privilege. Like you had a family member who was a physician before you. But people don't also recognize that, black skin is black skin. And so there's still barriers that even if you grow up in a privileged environment, that you still face that other people who are not black do not face. So can you help educate people on, yes, we can acknowledge some degree of privilege, right? But there's still barriers that even people who have two parents who are highly educated, they're black, they still face in the US.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I say often is that even with my college and medical school degree from Harvard, I still am 5 times more likely than a white woman with an eighth grade education to die of pregnancy related complications. So, yes, socioeconomic status is somewhat protective for Black folks, but not fully protective. And so I think that speaks to how pervasive systemic and interpersonal racism is and how it impacts our lives and our health. I think a lot of times people can say, oh, wow, look at all of these Black entertainers or these Black athletes. And, our president was Black. But the fact is like, when you think about it, the collective well-being of our communities, is that improving? That is not materially improving. Then it doesn't matter if there are individuals who are successful if the community is not healthier.
And so people heard it in your bio, you weren't just a practicing physician, you were also in academic medicine. And so your book, you talk about this bias doesn't just occur in a hospital, but you write about some of the things that you've experienced as a professor. And myself, I'm a professor as well. So I understand academic life very well. Can you talk about some of these challenges you face as a professor?
At the time I was going through it, I felt so alone and isolated. Like you feel like, it's just you. You're being undervalued, underappreciated. I was talking to my team. I have a consulting firm, Advancing Health Equity, and it's grown tremendously over the last 5 years. But I started it at a time when in my academic career, I was feeling very small. I was feeling invisible. I was feeling silenced. I was feeling muzzled, and I was trying to look for a way out. And that's what often happens in academic environments, predominantly white environments, where you're there and you think you're doing the work that you're supposed to be doing. You're working hard, you're keeping your head down, and you're still not valued and appreciated. You're passed over for promotions. You're not given proper mentoring. You're not given sponsorship opportunities. And so that's why it's so challenging for us to be in these environments, because one, I know they were not made with us in mind. They actually were made to exclude us. And so that's why they can be incredibly harmful to us if we don't have the support that we need. So I always say, like, we want to be able to, wherever we are, whatever workplace, we want to be able to thrive and not just survive. And a lot of us are just surviving in academics.
And so as we go back over to the healthcare side, I always tell people, I don't think Black people should need a Black physician in order to receive exceptional healthcare.
I feel the same way. I agree.
Right.
That's like a low bar. That's a low bar.
Exactly. But we know from the research, Black physicians matter because we see that they do tend to have better health outcomes when they have Black physicians. So we need to change that first. But correct me if I'm wrong, I think the last number I saw was Black physicians make up a little less than maybe 6% of the physicians in the US. Tell us, why are these numbers still so persistently low? And what can we do about it to increase the number of Black physicians?
Well, in legacy, that's why I thought it was so important to talk about the Flexner Report, because I wanted to explain how organizational policy, institutional policy can be violent towards our community. So Flexner Report of 1910, named after Abraham Flexner, the education specialist who was commissioned by the American Medical Association and Carnegie Foundation to go around and assess all 155 US and Canadian medical schools, compare them against the gold standards in Western Europe and Johns Hopkins. And, looking at percentage of physician scientists on faculty, looking at the quality of the laboratory facilities. And we know, at the time there were 7 HBCUs. And that report led to the closure of 5 of them. They also led to the closure of some predominantly white schools as well. But we know that HBCUs, because of the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow, did not have the same resources. And so there was a study that showed if those 5 medical schools had remained open, so it left behind Howard and Meharry, but if those 5 medical schools had stayed open, they would have educated between 25 and 35,000 Black physicians.
Wow.
That number is tremendous. So there are between 25 and 35,000 missing Black physicians. Imagine the research that could be done, the patients that could be cared for, the communities that could be served. And so I think, a lot of us don't know enough about that history, but we also know that, the whole process of even getting to medical school depends on where you grow up, what kind of resources your parents have, how the quality of education in your community, the kind of college you go to. So we know that there are many, many barriers in the way to preventing more Black physicians.
So if you could extrapolate a little bit, what percentage do you think of those 25 to 30,000 students, is it a case that perhaps they could have gone to others, medical schools, PWIs perhaps?
So the thing is, we know at the time, and for a very long time, it was mostly Black HBCUs that were training. And to this day, it still is mostly HBCUs that put out the majority of Black physicians. So still HBCUs are doing the heavy lifting, even though there are literally a handful of them.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I'm sure many people, many of our listeners just do not understand the history
Yes.
of what happened and why these institutions are so important. But again, as we believe, you should get a great education anywhere you go. It should be treated fairly anywhere you go. But these institutions definitely serve a very valuable purpose to our society, and we need to fund them and we need to support them.
Absolutely. That's why I don't know if you heard about the Bloomberg philanthropies, donated $600 million to the 4 HBCUs. I mean, that's tremendous, especially in the climate that we're in now, anti-DEI. That was a huge symbol of affirming the importance of Black medical schools.
Absolutely. So can you share with our listeners what you perceive to be perhaps some of the most urgent reforms needed to take place in our healthcare system to address these disparities?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that you may have heard that there are Xavier University is opening a medical school. It'll take 2 to 3 years to get accredited. Morgan State is also opening an osteopathic medical school. Is that enough? No. That's definitely not going to be enough. And so what I also think, and I say this often, is I think that we need pipeline programs that are funded from our government, federal government, and private institutions. I do think that it is the responsibility of predominantly white institutions to make sure that they are training, educating a healthcare workforce that reflects our communities. So what does that look like? That looks like, yes, Bloomberg Philanthropies should be donating billions of dollars, but also these academic, predominantly white institutions should be thinking about how can we share our resources with HBCUs? How can we develop pipeline programs starting from preschool? So we know it's not just about exposure. It's not just about representation, but what would it look like to make sure that we are exposing children to these professions, but also supporting them in their education and making sure that when they get into these learning environments, that these learning environments are equitable and not psychologically violent toward Black students. That's the other thing.
Right.
And then making sure we know also there's the racial wealth gap. And so we know that we are starting out with literally a fraction, a sixth of the resources that white families have. And that has a tremendous impact on access to different environments.
So let's talk about that really quickly, the wealth gap. And the wealth gap turns into an opportunity gap. And so, there's a lot of conversations about, grad students organizing. I did a PhD, and most of our PhD programs are what we call fully funded, right? Where we get a stipend. And if we're lucky, in many cases, they give us healthcare. Our work is to be a research assistant to a professor, right? And so I always say, despite the shortcomings of this model we have and the little stipends sometimes that we have, I always say it's still the best deal in graduate education, because many other programs like law school, like medical school, they're not paying their students, right? and you have to still go full time, and you can't necessarily hold down a job. And so
That's true.
it takes a certain amount of wealth even to pursue the opportunity to go to medical school. Because if you don't have a family who can sustain you throughout those 4 years,
Yes.
it's going to be difficult for a bright student who's poor to get through medical school.
Well, and even there is the data from the AAMC showing that, even when you look at how well students do on the MCAT, that it is directly related to socioeconomic status, and that there is a disproportionate representation of students from upper socioeconomic levels in medical school. So it's not because they are any smarter, it's because they have had opportunities that have given them access to being accepted and thriving in those environments.
Right. And with the recent Supreme Court case, striking down affirmative action, we've already see the numbers at MIT and places like that. And for me, again, as a organizational psychologist who deal with data, think about this. The people who went to these schools before, they have already showed that they can be successful in these schools and graduate from them. But now the fact that we see this drop of African American and Latinx students going because of the admission standards, that's not a function, again, of people's preparation or whether or not they can be successful. That's just a function of your selection.
Right. I mean, I think that this SCOTUS decision, like the Flexner Report, we're only going to see, I mean, like you said, we've started seeing the impact, but literally we're going to see this for generations to come if there are not other policies that are enacted to counteract the violence of that policy.
As a DEI researcher, and consultant, many people ask me, well, Oscar, why is this important? We can get a great education everywhere. And I say, you're absolutely correct. People get great educations at many institutions, over 4,000 institutions in the US.
Yes.
But it is important to focus on the small set of schools because in our country, these small sets of people deemed elite schools, they have an outsized results and outcomes in terms of what people get when they go to these institutions.
And to be honest with you, I see that with, even me, right? Like,
Right.
I know that even writing Legacy, there was something sexy about it. She went to Harvard, you know what I mean? And I know that there are opportunities that I've had because of my educational pedigree, which is interesting because when I think about my children, I have two boys, they're almost 8 and 10. And I think about the learning environments that I want them in. I want them, I'm more concerned about their socio-emotional well-being than even academics, or both are important.
Right.
I'd rather them be in predominantly Black settings. And I actually, if I could do it again, I wish I went to an HBCU. I feel like people are oh yeah, you say that now. But no, but when I look at the community and the connections that people come out of HBCUs having compared to Ivy Leagues or predominantly white institutions, it's different and it's priceless.
I agree as well. I say I wish I went to Morehouse. Many people know my husband went to Morehouse, and our son, who's 6, can tell you right now, like, where are you going to school? I'm going to Morehouse.
That's amazing.
At 6, he will tell you. And so we are raising him up right. But I totally agree. I have had a successful career and have done great things. But if I knew then what I know now, I wish I could have gone to Morehouse to have that HBCU experience. Because when I see them together and just the fellowship, the brotherhood that they have, it is just, I'm so envious. It's just amazing. It's beautiful. And so I totally agree with you that I wish I would have gone to HBCU when I was an undergrad as well. So totally agree. Well, writing this book must have taken a lot of courage. And I imagine some sadness as you reflected on your mother and even your own experiences with the medical system. So what do you think you learned most about writing it?
Oh, wow. It's interesting. I will say just, in response to the first part of your question is like, I didn't know that I was being like brave when I was going through all of this. Like when I was writing the book, it was my opportunity to speak truth to power. And so I really embraced it. I have to admit that when the publication date came, I was like, oh my goodness, so people are actually going to be reading this and internalizing it. But now that it's out to the world, I feel almost unburdened. I wish, and what I hope from this experience that I have had in terms of, getting a book deal, writing a book, becoming New York Times sellers, I hope I make the path and the journey easier for folks who come after me who want to do the same, because there are so many of us who have such important stories to tell. when I think about how underappreciated we are by, PWI, and organizations like those, it breaks my heart because we really are the ones that are coming in with a very, very unique perspective that should be valued and appreciated. And instead, the opposite happened. And so this writing legacy was my chance. It was my chance to put my experiences into print that will live on forever. And I want that for as many of us that want to do that.
That's amazing. I mean, your book is absolutely amazing. I just love all of the stories. And I'm hoping that it is impacting policy as we speak and medical education and medical practice as we speak. I believe that it is. I'm hoping that I'm saying that from my mouth to God's ears that it impacts the medical system for us. But, I live in New Jersey. I remember my family is from Virginia. I remember having to leave New Jersey to drive to Virginia because my mom was in the hospital and it wasn't a serious illness. And so I wasn't planning on going to see her in the hospital in Virginia because, we were communicating via phone. My brother lives in Virginia. So, he had her. But I just remember when I talked to her and talked about her treatment, I knew she was not getting the best healthcare that she deserved. And I knew that was probably because she was a Black woman, and we can tell socioeconomic status immediately when people speak often, right? And so I said, no, this is not going to happen. I'm going to drive down to Virginia, the 4.5 hour drive, to talk to her physician myself to make sure she's receiving the care. And when I got there and talked to them, things straightened up. They really had a different persona with her and with me when I got there. So what advice could you give patients, when they think that they're not receiving the best healthcare, or how could they advocate for themselves?
I have to tell you, that question always makes me tense because I feel like the burden should be on the system to fix the systemic inequities. But at the same time, it's like we want to make sure we're going in there fully prepared, right? I always say that there are a few things that you should make sure you ask your health professional. But even before that, I say make sure that you're writing down the symptoms that you're having. Make sure that you write down the questions that you want to ask. A lot of times once you get there in that clinical setting, you may feel nervous or you may not be feeling well at all. Make sure you bring someone with you, either for moral support or for surveillance purposes. There was a TikTok video that a white healthcare professional recorded that said, I want to know why when I walk into an exam room with Black patients, they always have someone on FaceTime. And I'm like, oh, it's because we don't trust you. That's why. And so when you see a health professional, you always want to ask them, what do you think is going on with me? Make sure you have an answer to that. What is your plan? What is the follow-up that you recommend? What are the symptoms or signs that I should come back to see the doctor for or to the ER for? And then also don't feel bad about saying, I want a second opinion. I'm going to go to somebody else or getting a third opinion. It's so important. We see a lot of the mistreatment that we experience is because our concerns are ignored, minimized, right? Or disregarded. And so a lot of it's preventable. And so it's very important for us to make sure that we are engaging with health professionals who are listening to us.
I agree with you. I don't think the onus should be on individual patients, but I also like to arm people
Yeah.
with individual actions if I can. So I appreciate the advice that you did give. We think about there's so many cases. Serena Williams famously mentioned, her situation that she experienced when she was giving birth. And so again, someone who's athletic, who takes care of themselves, who's as wealthy, right?
I know.
Still experience, these types of situations. What does it say for a person like my mother who walk into a healthcare setting and all of the stereotypes and things, maybe going through people's minds as soon as she opened her mouth. And she doesn't have the resources, that other people may have. And so I appreciate you sharing that advice because, a lot of listeners want to know, what can I do? So let's take the advice further. I'm sure, like myself, when a lot of people see us, they ask us, what can I do to follow your path and things like that. So what advice, do you have for people who want first to get into medical school and then, thankfully they're successful, they get out and they go into residency and, they're now physicians. What advice do you have at each of those important phases of their lives of getting in, getting out, and getting your job and all that type of stuff.
It's so interesting because I feel like if I could do it again, I would probably ask myself or like do more check-ins and be like, medical school, like are you in alignment with like what's important to you? What is your purpose? What is your vision? I also think it's important that we seek out, especially for us, that we seek out mentorship because a lot of it may not be in the institution that you're at, but reaching out to people, arranging phone calls, but also recognizing that mentorship is not just an extractive process of you getting, just getting information from the person that's more senior from you. You also come with questions, update them. It's a two-way relationship. So I think mentorship is incredibly important. And for us, we actually have to be kind of like assertive about finding mentorship. And I think also what I wish I had done is talk to people who are later on in their careers, because I feel like they have a lot of wisdom to share in terms of lessons learned. Like, what would you have done differently? What are some experiences that you had? So I think finding people at different points in their career, like early, mid, and late career, and really trying to form relationships and mentoring relationships with people would be helpful.
Going back, we talked about the 6% number and it's really low. And, you were part of that number and you made the decision to walk away from actual practicing medicine and, being a professor. How do you feel, about that decision? I'm sure it was a tough decision. Yeah.
Yeah, it was so hard, but it's the best decision I ever made because I think the other point to remember is that we can be impactful in many different ways. What I'm doing now in terms of my health equity advocacy, writing this book, speaking, running my consulting firm, Advancing Health Equity, I am doing the work in ways I had never imagined. So I think that we have to be true to ourselves. We feel like our calling is as well. And yes, I definitely miss that interpersonal interaction with my patients. But I also know that the work that I'm doing is important, as important, and that our younger generation, folks, pre-meds, medical students can see that there are different ways to make a difference.
I will imagine you are just multiplying the Uchés out there because you're doing this great work that you're doing
Yeah, I hope
now.
so. I hope so.
So as we close, I believe in giving people their flowers while they can appreciate them. And so I wanted you to talk to us about perhaps some of your mentors and particularly critical moments of your life, how some of their advice kind of really kept you going when you needed it the most.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I mentioned this person in my book, and I actually just spoke to her today for the first time in a long time. But when we're talking about, how few Black physicians there are, and sometimes it's so hard to find mentors. One of my mentors was a white woman in internal medicine, not even in my department, who I connected with during a really tough time in my academic career, who gave me just a lot of advice about, how do I advocate for myself to my chair? How do I advocate for more protected time or to do the research that I want to do? So I definitely want to make sure I give, my flowers to folks who are engaged in, cross-racial mentoring because we just don't have enough numbers. One mentor is not going to fulfill all the needs that you have, but many mentors could possibly do that. And so, yeah, so this mentor in particular, I connected with her today after a long time, told her she was so impactful that I wrote about her in my book. So I want to just, recommend people, reach out to whoever you see needs your mentorship.
Excellent. So everyone who knows me know that the nonprofit, the PhD Project, I absolutely love. I would not be here without the PhD Project. So it was started in 1994, a way to increase corporate diversity by increasing diversity in front of the classroom and faculty members. And so the model that the PhD Project has of support, of mentoring, of getting students who are African American, Hispanic American, Native Americans through business PhD programs, I think that model should be adopted across the board for many of our disciplines where these numbers are really, really low. And so Bloomberg, whoever philanthropy out there, create a PhD project for medical school students so that we can get these numbers up. Thank you so much, Uché, for joining me as a guest chair today. You've enlightened us so much about racism in medicine, and I sincerely hope that our healthcare system do better by all of us because our lives literally depend on it. I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to Diversity Matters. If you enjoyed our show and want to hear more, please subscribe to our show, post, talk about, and reshare our show with all of your friends and family, and leave us a favorable rating and review so that will make it easier for others to find us wherever they listen to podcasts. We cannot do this important work or keep it going without you, so we really appreciate your support. We especially like to thank our episode sponsor, De La O Art Studio. The owner, Hugo De La O, is an amazingly talented artist who also uses his art to support social justice issues. Visit www.delaoarts.com to explore artwork, merchandise, and show dates. If you or your company would like to sponsor a Diversity Matters episode, please visit the podcast section of our website at www.whconsultingfirm.com for more information. Diversity Matters is produced by WH Consulting, a firm that provides a wide range of management consulting and professional services to individuals and organizations. Original music produced by Sincere Morton Murray. Until next time, peace and love.